Hello, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of Mr. Brown's Cold War lessons. I am not in school today, but should get some quality learning in you today. So let's just remember where I left off last time. Talked all about nuclear weapons and how Southern Nevada is just the fun-filled nuclear capital of the world. Oh man, look at all this desert getting just irradiated. Oh, so pleasant. All right. Well, today I'm going to talk to you about two events that occurred within the Cold War. Both of these were relatively violent events, so let's check them out. All right. First thing is the Korean War, one of the three major wars fought during the Cold War. And the Korean War is something I know possibly too much about. I wrote a 50-page paper on this thing when I was in college, so yeah, I know a lot. Anyway, let me tell you the situation with Korea. So, Korea, for almost all of human history, was one united country, cultural land. But the Japanese took it over before World War II. And once the Japanese lost World War II, America and the Soviet Union decided to make a deal where we cut Korea in half. And North Korea would sort of have the Soviet Union's support, South Korea would have the United States' support. Well, the Soviet Union thought, hey, Korea's, on the other side of the world from the United States. It's pretty close to us. I don't think America will mind if we just, take over the whole dang thing. Well, of course, we mind. But anyway, what happened was the leader of North Korea, this douchebag named Kim Il sung, decides to get the assistance from the Soviet Union, gets all kinds of guns, tanks, airplanes, and stuff, and he decides to blitz South Korea. South Korea was not ready for it, and within a couple weeks, the whole country was almost taken over by North Korea. It was really bad. Well, South Korea desperately calls on the United States for help, and sure enough, we send help. And yeah, there were plenty of times when I was living in South Korea where just people were thankful, that America helped him out back then. One time, a guy bought me drinks because I was an American. I was like, "Thanks, man. That's cool." I appreciate being on the right side of history. Um, but anyway, here's some images from the Korean War. So the American military does intervene, and we do send in, tanks and jet airplanes. Yeah, jet airplanes are brand new in this war. And we did all this stuff to help out South Korea. So an important distinction is the 38th parallel. This is sort of a random line that the Soviet Union and the United States agreed would cut Korea in half. But I mean, there's like some cities on this line and stuff like that, so it really wasn't a very good cutting point. And then here's Kim Il sung. What a douchebag. He pretty much looks, his grandson, the current leader of North Korea, Kim Jong Un, looks pretty much just like his granddad. That's pretty interesting. But yeah, the North Koreans invade into the south, and things are starting to get real nasty. Okay, so once America joins in the war, we very quickly destroy the North Korean military. Like they can't stand up to our jets and our tanks and all this stuff. So we liberate all of South Korea. We get back to that border, the 38th parallel, and we sort of like, I don't think anyone even gives an official order. We're like, okay, well, we're going to take over North Korea now and unite North Korea under kind of the American system. Well, the Soviet Union was not happy about that. But another country that really didn't want that to happen is the country of China, which is also along the border of North Korea. China had recently become communist at this time and was totally on, Team Red Revolution. So China said, hey, America, if you go into North Korea and try to, connect it to South Korea, we're going to enter this war too. And the United States, we really didn't take China's threats seriously, and that was a big mistake, okay? Because, we're like, oh, China, they don't have nuclear bombs, they don't have tanks, they don't have airplanes. China has people. China has a lot of people. And if you remember anything about World War II and the Battle of Stalingrad, China learned those lessons. And China decided to use human wave tactics to just overwhelm the American military. And those tactics worked really well. We had never fought something like that before. Um, and, if you guys are interested in sort of the modern world today, because a lot of times kids ask me questions about, a possible World War III scenario or something like that. Well, China is not allied to the United States. China does have the largest standing military in the world, and China is kind of getting up and up in their expansions and stuff like that. So if you really do want to consider what a war between China and America would look like, well, we already had a war with China. It was called the Korean War. And when China entered the war, man, the United States Army was in full retreat. It was the worst retreat in U.S. military history. Um, yeah, man. Oh, and gosh, I could even talk about Chinese military tactics, but anyway. I'm going too deep. Um, but regardless, when the Chinese entered the war, they started kicking our butts, and they didn't care how many guys they were losing. They were they almost took over the whole country again. They pushed us all the way out of North Korea and even pushed us into South Korea a second time. So that was crazy. Crazy stuff. All right, hopefully everybody's good with this slide. I'll keep moving on. All right, here's a bunch of Chinese soldiers joining in there. 3 million of them crossed the Yalu River in November of 1950. That's crazy. Here they are just surrounding all kinds of South Korean soldiers. Interesting fact, the leader of communist China was this man, Mao Zedong. We'll learn about him later. Mao Zedong only had one son, and he loved his son, unlike Stalin. And Mao's son volunteered to fight the United States in the Korean War. And during the war, he was killed by the United States. Mao was very salty for a while, but I wonder how different world history would be if Mao's son survived and maybe China had kind of this dynasty thing like North Korea has. Whole lot of suffering happened in Korea during this time. Korea was just thoroughly destroyed. It became one of the poorest countries in the world, actually, for a time after the war was over. Here's, China and North Korea uniting together to beat up America. I don't know why we're blue. That's weird. And here's the same concept, but this time the American soldier is green. Huh. Interesting. Interesting. All right. So the Chinese super army pushes us down all the way past Seoul again. But then the United States military starts bringing in more and more resources. We get sort of this like night vision stuff where we can see troops moving at night. Well, it's not officially night vision, but it's something kind of like it. Anyway, we push back and we establish kind of these trench lines. So it sort of turns into World War I all over again. And for something like 2.5 years, it was American and South Korean soldiers fighting Chinese and North Korean soldiers right around the lines where the war started anyway. So a new president gets elected, President Eisenhower. He calls up the Chinese and North Koreans, and they come to the peace table, and they say, let's just hit the reset button and pretty much return to the starting locations of this war. Everybody agrees, except for actually South Korea does not agree, which was random. So South Korea was still functionally in a state of war with North Korea for the last like 60 years. I think they did recently sign that though. But yeah, a lot of people call this war the Forgotten War because the war solved nothing. Like, we fought a war with China and we didn't win. We just sort of stalemated and everybody went home. So this is definitely a concerning thing that affects us in the modern world today because North Korea isn't exactly the most friendly kid on the block. So here's the whole map of the Korean War. North Korea almost takes over the whole damn thing. South Korea pushes back. The Chinese come in, they push us back into the south, but then things sort of stabilize right around the place where things started. So Korea hostilities cease. That's pretty great. And yeah, all right. Next topic. Got 2 topics today. Let's talk about Cuba. So before I talk about the Cuban Revolution, let me say a couple things about what was going on in Cuba before 1959. Well, Cuba was kind of this resort party island that a lot of Americans went to. There was, gambling and entertainment and big hotels. It was sort of like a competition of Las Vegas, actually. And the leader of Cuba at the time was this man, just I call him Batista. And Batista really did have a lot of favoritism towards U.S. big businesses and United States interests, to the point where the people of Cuba, like the common farmers and people, felt really neglected. And they thought that they were, not receiving any of this wealth coming into the country. So when you have a disaffected group of, working class people, they're obviously going to be attracted to communism. And they found a leader in this guy, Fidel Castro. His brother Raul was also pretty instrumental. But Fidel recruited this, I believe, Argentinian guy named Che Guevara. He was kind of a big popular leader. There's a picture of him. Fidel and Che sort of worked together to lead the people of Cuba into a violent revolt. And for, I think, like 7 years, they were sort of doing these battles in the jungle. But ultimately, they did take over the big city of Havana. Batista got exiled to the United States. All kinds of Cuban people left the country because they were afraid, the workers' revolution was going to kill them or something. That's probably true. So anyway, Fidel and Che did successfully have a revolt in Cuba, and they declared it a socialist republic. So as you could imagine, the Soviet Union is going to give them a huge thumbs up. And a lot of the guns and military equipment that Fidel was using was straight from the Soviet Union. So there we go. Cuba has a socialist uprising, and it's been socialist communist ever since. So here we go. The reason why Cuba having an uprising is really important is because look where it is geographically. I mean, Florida is like 50 miles away. So the United States definitely did not feel secure having a socialist communist allied country to the Soviet Union so close to our borders. Here they people gambling in Havana, playing roulette. Cuban Revolution, Fidel fighting back. Havana, the city still pretty much looks like that today. They haven't done a whole lot of updating. And then there's Che and Fidel. Here's Fidel with an AK. And yep, Time Magazine, Fidel Castro. All right, so the United States was not going to tolerate having a socialist country right on our border. So what we did was we hired a bunch of mercenaries and found a bunch of Cuban exiles, people from Cuba who were running away from Che. We trained them how to fight. We bought them guns. We gave them boats. We gave them artillery cannons. And we said, look, if we send in the United States military to invade Cuba, that's going to look really bad and piss off the Soviet Union. But if we do this kind of on the down low and use these mercenaries and disaffected people to invade Cuba and to create kind of a government that's pro the United States, that's definitely in our interest. Well, this whole event was called the Bay of Pigs, and it was just a military disaster. Like, we sent in 1,500 guys to these beaches on Cuba and said, all right, go and attack Fidel's government and take over the country. But Fidel had an army of like 100,000 men. So, the guys we sent in were outnumbered like 50-1. And of course, they got massacred. And it was a huge embarrassment to the United States. But it definitely made Cuba be like, holy crap, America just sent in this, invasion to try to take us over. We need more protection. The Soviet Union gets involved and they say, hey, Cuba, whatever you want, we'll give it to you. We are not going to let the United States just, invade you and make you some kind of puppet government. Like if you're on team socialism and we're giving you all the perks. So that's definitely going to be a concern. All right, here's the Bay of Pigs disaster. It was definitely a very poorly planned operation. Here's a bunch of American pigs sinking down there, and a whole bunch of guys that we gave guns and supplies to died on those beaches in Cuba. All right, so fearing another invasion, the Soviet Union gave Fidel Castro an entire arsenal of nuclear weapons. and gave Fidel total permission to use those weapons at any time. When we heard about that, our president of the United States at the time, John F. Kennedy, was seriously freaked out because we knew that the Soviet Union had nukes and we knew they had nuclear missiles. But if they fired a nuclear missile all the way from the Soviet Union, it would take like 2 hours to get to the United States. We'd have time to, like, evacuate some of the cities and get people in fallout shelters. But once they put a whole, arsenal of nuclear weapons in Cuba, I mean, they could launch a missile and hit Washington, D.C. in like 25 minutes. Like, it's not enough time. So President Kennedy, he did something pretty bold. He got on the news and he said, "Hey, Soviet Union, I'm giving you 2 weeks to get all those nuclear weapons out of Cuba. If you don't get them out, I'm going to launch nuclear war." And he was serious. Like, it was not a bluff. And it was a very scary time for not only the United States, but the whole world. I mean, everybody, like the president of the United States just put a countdown clock of, 14 days, the world will end. And the Soviet Union, for the first week or so was like, screw you, America, like, you're not going to do it. But then, like, the tension started to build, and there were some other diplomatic crises events that went on. It was definitely the most serious 2 weeks in world history as far as, like, is the world going to end? And we called it the Cuban Missile Crisis. And man, there was some other crazy stuff that happened in those 2 weeks. Like, the Cubans shot down a couple of United States spy planes. There was this one Soviet Union ship that was getting really close to the United States. President Kennedy ordered us to blow it up, but then he rescinded the order in like the last 2 minutes. Man, it was wild. Eventually, what did happen though was on the last day when everybody was getting ready for nuclear war, President Kennedy's brother had a phone call with the guys in Moscow, and they ultimately said, "Okay, we'll get rid of the missiles in Cuba, but you guys got to get rid of some of your missiles in Europe. We got to sort of balance it out so that we all have 2 hours to prepare for the end of the world." And then we ultimately all agreed, and they did get rid of the missiles in Cuba. So that was pretty cool. All right, the world was saved, thank God. So here's some of those big nuclear missiles that they put all over Cuba. Here's the Soviet Union giving Fidel Castro nuclear teeth. And there were actually a lot of missiles in Cuba. We originally thought there were only like 3 or 4, but they had like 50, so it was bad. And they could hit just about anywhere in the United States. Also hit Mexico City too. Why you gotta hate on Mexico City? And then, all kinds of really big nuclear missiles, scary stuff. And here's John F. Kennedy deciding to end the world. And I do have a speech by John F. Kennedy that'll be your document today. And he just talks about, like the seriousness of this threat. And this is an American president using the power to end the world in a very serious way. All right, this is my last slide today. So I just want to give you some updates on the situation in Cuba. Fidel Castro took over Cuba in 1959, and he was in charge of that country until like 2013. Like, the dude was super old. Man, he kept it going. But Cuba actually had quite a few problems because after the whole Cuban Missile Crisis thing, we put a blockade around Cuba, and we only let in ships to Cuba that we sort of checked on first, because we weren't going to let nuclear weapons come back to Cuba ever again. And because of that blockade, it really did restrict Cuba's ability to kind of grow financially. So Cuba is still a generally poor country, but actually, as far as communist socialist countries go, they actually do some things pretty well. Famously, Cuban healthcare is actually done pretty well. The Cuban education system is done pretty well. So if you are someone who's curious about, communism, capitalism, definitely look at Cuba as a case study, and you can see maybe some things they do better than us. But I do also want to fill you in on his buddy Che Guevara. Here's a very famous picture of Che Guevara. It's kind of the symbol of the young revolutionary spirit. Um, Che and Fidel, they did ultimately have some disagreements about how to properly run a communist country, about how to, pursue communism around the world. So eventually, Fidel ordered his best friend to be killed, which I think is just savage. Um, and that part of history isn't mentioned a lot when there are people who are like, oh man, I love communism. Well, communists always kill each other. I mean, it's like Stalin and Trotsky. It's some people are just more radical than the other, and they don't want to live in a world where they have disagreements. So that's scary stuff. All right. Anyway, Cuba's still under a blockade, I believe today. I know Obama tried to help Cuba out quite a bit, but I don't think Trump's a fan of Cuba as much as Obama was. Here's Fidel and Che. There they are talking about getting people together. Che Guevara. Oh, look, Che Guevara's dead. Um, Fidel Castro in charge of that country from the 60s to the first decade or 2 decades of the 2000s. So, anyway, that's it for my topics today. You guys got some other videos all about Korean War and the Cuban Missile Crisis, but your biggest priority should be the document today. So hopefully you learned something, and I'll see you all next time. Peace out.